Said about it this morning. He said it's a mistake to arm them. Most of the arms that we've given the so-called moderate rebels have wound up in the hands of ISIS because ISIS simply takes it from them, or it is given to them, and we mistakenly actually end up giving it to some radicals. How look, things are very...
Has Rand Paul ever been to Syria? Has he ever met with ISIS? Has he ever met with any of these people? No. We're going to have a fight because it's patently false. This is the same Rand Paul that said we didn't want to have anything to do with anything to do in the Middle East, by the way. I don't want to get in a fight with him at all. Yeah. But it's not true. I know these people. I'm in contact with them all the time.
Then let me ask you this.
He is not.
Senator, I know your background. I believe you when you say you have sources on the ground. But I've got to be clear, because I was a little surprised. It was in the Hill. It was in this weekend. They cite the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights monitoring events for the United Kingdom. And what they said, the groups agreed to a non-aggression pact in which they promised not to attack each other. You're saying this report in the Hill by this group is false. And you know for a fact.
I know for a fact that the Free Syrian Army is being attacked by both Bashar Assad and by ISIS, and they have suffered hundreds of casualties at the hands of both. I know that they are not giving up their fight. I know that we can make them strong and resilient, but arming and equipping 5,000 a year in the face of a 30,000-man army means that the United States of America is not serious.
Listen, I'm not saying that these are easy questions to answer.
Sure.
I mean, we can go back to arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan many years ago with Stinger missiles, some of which have later been used and propped up and used against Americans. It seems like a very delicate question. Do we need to examine it further, more deeply, and know the people whose hands these weapons are going to get in?
Is it too much to bear? The very idea that we would ever back Islamic terrorists seems too bizarre to be believable. Some would suggest this is the result of having a secretly Islamic president who desires the rise of fundamentalist Islam across the whole of the Middle East. Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, admitted the fact that we had created al-Qaeda back in the 1980s.
So if you think if we walked away from this, didn't give them money today, it would be worse for us from a security standpoint?
I do. We're building a relationship that just did not exist. I said in our last trip when you were with me that we had a huge trust deficit, in part because the United States had, to be fair, we had helped to create the problem we're now fighting.
How?
Because when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets inside Afghanistan. And we were successful. The Soviets left Afghanistan, and then we said, great, goodbye, leaving these trained people who were fanatical in Afghanistan and Pakistan, leaving them well armed, creating a mess, frankly, that at the time we didn't really recognize. We were just so happy to see the Soviet Union fall, and we thought, okay, fine, we're okay now. Everything's going to be so much better. Now you look back, the people we're fighting today, we were supporting in the fight against the Soviets.
In his memoir entitled From the Shadows, Robert Gates, director of the CIA under Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr., and Secretary of Defense under both George W. Bush and Barack Obama, revealed that the U.S. actually began the covert operation 6 months prior, with the express intention of luring the Soviets into a quagmire.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right. And
he has proven to be an outstanding friend and somebody who I've learned an immense amount from, and for him to support me in this campaign and then be willing to come out here to Iowa is a testimony to his generosity. So if everybody could please give Dr. Brzezinski another round of applause.
The lethality of their power is greater than ever. Their capacity to impose control over the politically awakened masses of the world is at a historical low. I once put it rather pungently, and I was flattered that the British Foreign Secretary repeated this, as follows. Namely, in earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people, literally. It was easier to control 1 million people than physically to kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. It is easier to kill than to control. And of course that bears directly on the use of force, particularly by societies that are culturally alien over other societies.
A closer look at history tells us this pattern of manipulation goes back to might be the very origins of the religion of Islam.